It's a path a lot of people lose their footing on, and I knew I was very vulnerable to that because of my background. And so I decided, I went to the beach and asked myself like a question, why am I doing this? And I realized it wasn't for fame or for money, it was for the opportunity to do something that I love and that I believe in. And that's an opportunity I never thought I'd be given in life.
Sometimes in retrospect, I'm glad I grew up poor.
Yeah, I think it's a benefit.
Yeah.
I think that we learn we're capable only by having an obstacle to overcome. I'm starting to get really interested and really passionate about being able to communicate the same things I always talked about in songs, but now through other forms.
Plus, secret talent.
I can move every muscle on my face.
You can what?
I can move every muscle on my face. I can yodel. That might be cooler. God, did you say yodeling was cooler?
All next on Larry King Now. Welcome to Larry King Now. She only needs one name. Jewel is a Grammy Award-nominated multi-platinum singer-songwriter whose music has sold more than 30 million albums globally. Her latest album is called Picking Up the Pieces. We have it right here. And Jewel's memoir, Never Broken, Songs Are Only Half the Story, a New York Times bestseller, is now available in paperback as well. And she's debuted a website in conjunction with the book, also called Never Broken. Nice seeing you again,
Nice seeing you. And I have to say the dexterity of talking to the camera and getting these without looking was very impressive.
Yeah,
You're professional. If you're professional, it ain't a hobby.
Tell me about the website. It features exercises to retrain your brain.
Yeah. The reason I wrote the book is because a lot of people ask me how I went from having an abusive background to moving out at 15 to being homeless and not become a statistic. I did know that, you know, statistically, girls like me, especially if you move out at that young of an age, would repeat the cycle that they were raised by. So I should have been, you know, in an abusive relationship or on drugs or on a pole or some combination of those things. And I didn't want to be a statistic. And so I looked at this idea of nature versus nurture. And if we didn't receive good nurture, could you actually ever get to know your nature? And could you re-nurture yourself? And so I felt like these were questions I had to answer if I was going to avoid repeating the cycle I was raised by.
And you do it yourself?
Well, I didn't have any resources. I didn't have therapists, and I literally was just a girl, 15, hitchhiking to work to try and cover rent. But I started, you know, looking and studying things. Nature was a great resource, actually, for me, and observance. So I read a lot and determined things like what I call emotional English. You know, we're all raised with an emotional language that we speak in our households. It's kind of invisible to us, but it's our language of love and relating. And when we grow up, that is the language we speak. So even if we don't like the language we were raised with, and we can say, pretend it's English, you know, English hurt me. Or if it's abuse hurt me, I'll never be abusive to my kids. All that does is create a vacuum. You actually have to learn a new language if you're going to replace the old language. And so that's what a lot of my life was about.
And you could teach it in a website?
Yeah, it's actually through a lot of mindfulness exercises. Back in, you know, the 80s and 90s when I was figuring these things out for myself, there weren't words like mindfulness. But that's basically what it is. And there's a lot of brain science behind these types of exercises. And it really does help create new neural pathways. There's, you know, amazing research on just even a gratitude practice will help grow your brain. It's incredible. Meditation can grow your brain. It's
so
really amazing science.
About the brain.
Yeah.
And learning all the time, right?
It is, yeah. It's a really amazing frontier.
How did Jewel overcome? You didn't have this knowledge when you were 17, 18. How did you break out?
For me,
your talent? Was it music?
Oh, yeah, it wasn't my talent or my music, I don't feel. Or if I was to say if my terms of success were how do I find happiness, what was my talent for that, I would say it was this ability to look inward. And what took me 40 years to piece together, it didn't happen overnight. It took a long time for me to learn these things.
40 years? You're not 40 years
I'm 42 years old, but thank you. I appreciate it.
You were homeless by yourself in San Diego?
Yeah, I had a boss that propositioned me, and when I wouldn't have sex with him, he fired me, and I couldn't pay my rent that day, and I got kicked out where I was living. And I thought, you know, no big deal, I'll live in my car for a couple months. But then I had bad kidneys, and I kept getting sick. Couldn't afford insurance or antibiotics. I actually almost died in the parking lot of an emergency room because they wouldn't see me because I didn't have insurance. I have no idea if that was legal at the time, but I had blood poisoning because my kidneys had failed, and I was in my car throwing up all over myself. And a doctor had seen me, a doctor had seen me get turned away, and he gave me some antibiotics and saved my life. And then my car got stolen, and that's how I ended up homeless.
So how did you get over that?
I turned to shoplifting.
You shoplifted?
Yeah.
Never got caught?
While I was homeless, I never did get caught. It started with carrots, which must be the gateway vegetable, because it led to harder stuff eventually. And one day I was trying to steal a dress, and I looked in the mirror, and I suddenly saw what I was. And for a girl that set out to not be a statistic, 3 short years later, I was one. I was homeless, and I was stealing, and I was going to end up in jail or dead in short order if I didn't really change things. And so I remembered a quote that I had read by Buddha, that happiness doesn't depend on who we are or what we have, it depends on what we think. And that's literally all I had left were my thoughts. And so I thought maybe I can turn my life around one thought at a time. And so I learned to really discipline my mind, and that was an amazing journey that led me where I am.
You weren't able to look in the mirror and say, I am a beautiful girl and I have talent.
I was very bifurcated. There was part of me that was in a little bit of denial about the trouble that I was in. And when I looked in the mirror, I realized I actually was in trouble. And I wasn't a famous singer. I wasn't even the most talented person in any neighborhood. It really wasn't about that. For me, it was really, I was having panic attacks. I was agoraphobic. I was shoplifting. And if I continued with those things, it was going to continue to go down for me.
You were homeless in San Diego, so at least you didn't have a weather problem, right?
No, it was very nice.
Where would you sleep?
I had a little corner that I liked that I sort of called my home. It was by an oleander bush. 18.
Now, people must have walked by. Did you have a sign, I need help?
No, I never had a sign. I remember things like I would wash my hair in a Denny's bathroom sink that was on the corner. And I would stick my head in there and use the hand soap as shampoo, and I would use the paper towels as a towel. And I was picking out paper towels for my hair, and I realized the women behind me were annoyed because I was holding up the line for them to wash their hands after the restroom. And I suddenly looked up, and these women, I could see them in the mirror behind me. They were backed up against the wall as if I had leprosy. And I remember, them walking out very quickly, just frightened of me and saying, well, she looked pretty enough. I wonder how she ended up like that. And the other one said, probably drugs. And they had no idea.
How do I get to the website?
It's jewelneverbroken.com.
Jewelneverbroken.com.
And I made very simple, very doable mindfulness exercises that take minutes a day that really help you identify your emotional language and learn a new one.
Jewelneverbroken.com. And the book Never Broken is now out in paperback.
Yes.
Our guest is a singer-songwriter, Jewel. We'll discuss the state of the music industry and Jewel's relationship with her 90s hits after the break. We'll be right back. We're back with Jewel. The book Never Broken is now in paperback. The album is Picking Up the Pieces, and the website is jewelneverbroken.com. It's been said that your vulnerability was groundbreaking for music in the 90s. Is that true, do you think?
Yeah, I broke out at the height of grunge.
You were an atypical pop star, though, right?
I was, yeah. I was signed at the height of grunge, and I had realized when I was homeless that it was much safer to be vulnerable than it was to be armored up, that your armor actually alienates you from humanity and you can't ever actually have human connection, and I craved human connection. And so, for me, the journey of learning to transmute pain into beauty versus pain into bitterness was a really important part of being able to be whole and not just be damaged by your background. And that's what caused me to choose to write in a really vulnerable and very honest style. And once I got signed, I also did it because I was so young when I got signed. I was 18. This way I wouldn't be typecast. I could be flawed. I wouldn't have to use art as propaganda to make myself seem perfect. I could just be honest.
How'd you get your break? How'd you get signed?
I was trying to get by and trying to get off the street and get rent. I couldn't hold jobs down because I was sick so often. And so I was raised singing. My dad was a musician. I've been singing on stage since I was 5, in bars doing cover songs. And so I thought maybe I could get a gig one night a week. But I didn't know how to play cover songs, so I just started writing a lot of material. I found a coffee shop that was going out of business, and so they said I could keep the door money as long as I brought people in. And so I just set about doing a show once a week, and I built a crowd.
Using the name Jewel?
Yeah, Jewel Kilcher. I don't really remember. I didn't really think about any of that back then.
So somebody heard you or saw you and...
Yeah, after about a year, it ended up being standing room only, and I got this amazing fan base built, and a radio station had heard about me, and they came and put a bootleg of mine on at 2 a.m., and it ended up so requested, I ended up in the top 10 countdown in between Nirvana and Soundgarden, just an acoustic girl, on a demo.
Well, how did you connect with suddenly, out of this, becoming a hit? I mean, the transformation must have been incredible for you.
Yeah, it was funny when I got signed. I actually was quite afraid. I didn't think fame is a path a lot of people lose their footing on. And I knew I was very vulnerable to that because of my background. I knew I was really deeply flawed. And so I decided, I went to the beach and asked myself a question, why am I doing this? And I realized it wasn't for fame or for money, it was for the opportunity to do something that I love and that I believe in. And that's an opportunity I never thought I'd be given in life. And so I made a deal, I turned down $1 million signing bonus. I took a really big back end and royalty so that if I ever sold records, I would make the money. Because I read a book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business, and I realized it's a loan. So if I took that $1 million, I would have had to sell enough records to pay them back, or else I would be dropped. And I knew I was going to make a folk record at the height of grunge, and the probability of that succeeding was slim. So I turned down the signing bonus and said, hey, if I sell records, then I'll make money. And I set about going to work, and I didn't ever get a tour bus. I had a rental car. I did 6 shows a day. I did 3 cities a day. I did it for years. And finally, after about 1.5 years of that record coming out, I broke, but it was just through a lot of elbow grease.
You made more than $1 million.
I did, yeah. It worked out.
What's the state of the business today?
I find the state of the business today really interesting. I think it's a great time for entrepreneurs.
10
it's
years
sort of the
ago,
new
you
Wild
said
West.
it was deteriorating.
Yes, you were right. Good memory. It's been deteriorating a long time. It's deserved to fail in a lot of ways. I think that artists, managers, and labels all quit thinking in terms of long-term careers. How do you create a long-term, iconic type of celebrity or brand? And even artists quit. They just could make singles. And finally, the marketplace caught up, technology caught up, and gave the consumer the power to say, I don't want to pay for 12 songs when only one is good. And the world changed.
But can you make big money recording? It's all appearances today, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
you
more
can't
appearances
make big money recording.
and touring. There's no money in records. There's no money in books.
Are you still touring?
I don't tour a lot. And actually, now that I've had my son, I've been looking at ways of saying, what messages do I have besides just songwriting, so that I can create, a job that I love. Yeah, I'll write more. Yeah, I'm starting to get really interested and really passionate about being able to communicate the same things I always talked about in songs, but now through other forms. And your curriculum idea is a good one.
How old is your boy?
He's 5.
Don't you miss singing?
I still sing. I just got off the road. I just put this record out, but I don't do it like most artists. I don't do it every single year. I don't put a record out every single year.
Because you don't have the need to? Most performers have the need to sing. The comic has the need to stand on stage and tell jokes. The writer has a need to write.
I don't have the need to do it every day. I've never had the need for applause. I love the craft. I love learning. I love expressing myself. I feel blessed, and I love doing shows. But it's not something I feel like I crave or I need, or I don't feel complete without it.
Sometimes in retrospect, I'm glad I grew up poor.
Yeah, I think it's a benefit.
Yeah.
I think that we learn we're capable only by having an obstacle to overcome.
Coming up, Jewel's Alaskan roots and her greatest musical influences. That's next. The album is Jewel picking up the pieces. There's a quote on the cover, what we call reality in actuality is our perception of it. And the book is Never Broken. It was a major bestseller in the New York Times in hardcover. It's now out in paperback. The subtitle, Songs Are Only Half the Story. Your life motto is hard wood grows slowly. Explain.
Not the sexiest motto, but when I was young, I would look at the trees, and the ones that grew quickly fell over quickly. And the ones that took their time remained a long time. And I thought, that's what kind of person I want to be. And so how do you figure out what shape you want to be when you're older? And I realized that really defining your values creates the shape that your life takes, and it creates the type of person that you are. And so really being able to determine and write down your values and know what actions support those values, and knowing what actions sell out those values, will tell you how good your compass is, that you'll be able to end up in the destination that you want to end up in.
What was it like to grow up in Alaska?
Amazing. My family were pioneers and homesteaders. I was raised by very independent, self-reliant people. I was taught to work hard. I was taught I was capable because I had to learn to do things for myself.
City?
A little town outside of a town called Homer, Alaska. There's actually a show about my family on the Discovery Network. People don't realize it's my dad and my uncle, but it's called Alaska, The Last Frontier, and that's shot on the homestead where I was raised, yeah.
Were you close to them, or did you have a hard life?
I was close to my dad. My mom left when I was 8, so he took me and my brothers back to the homestead. I was raised in a saddle barn on the homestead. We had an outhouse and a little hose that came up through the sink for the running water. No plumbing, It's pretty rustic.
Was he a good father?
My dad, let's see, I'm very glad he took us. He and I are close now, but after the divorce, he turned to alcohol. He had PTSD pretty bad from Vietnam, as well as he had a really abusive childhood. And so he ended up repeating a lot of the cycles that he was raised by. So he began being abusive when I was 8, and that's why I moved out at 15.
You rekindled that relationship?
Yeah, that's largely to do with him. I'm a person that will forgive and move on. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be in my life again. But he earned a place in my life because he really not only showed that he was sorry, but was actually to create change in his life. And he let me tell some really difficult stories in the book that I really appreciate him allowing me to share, because they're pretty rough, about some abusive situations. And I really got to then show the arc of where he is now, because I don't think people talk about abuse with the idea that it's inherited the same way our genes are inherited. And unless you speak up and you learn a new behavior, you're going to repeat it. And my dad learned to break the behavior, and it's an amazing evolution.
That's great. Yeah. So you're close.
We are.
We're going to play a little game of If You Only Knew. I'll just throw some questions at you.
Perfect.
Who was your childhood celebrity crush?
Leif Garrett.
Who?
Leif Garrett. Leif? I don't know how to say it. Yeah.
Secret talent?
I can move every muscle on my face.
You can what?
I can move every muscle on my face. I can yodel. That might be cooler. God, did you say yodeling was cooler?
I like yodel. Let me hear a yodel.
Would you like the Swiss style or the German style?
Oh.
I'll pick.
What was that?
That's German.
Favorite song to sing in the shower?
Whatever hits my head that day.
Who would you trade places with for a day?
Anybody.
What should we all be paying more attention to?
Our thoughts.
Guilty pleasure.
Frosting.
Greatest musical influence.
Okay, Frosting and Angela Lansbury, Murder, She Wrote marathons. Next question.
Greatest musical influence.
Pablo Neruda.
Something you long believed to be true and realized wasn't.
The future of my life isn't up to me.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Oh God, I'm gonna sound like such a hippie. Love.
Last time you cried.
Oh gosh, probably not long ago. A couple days, yeah.
Favorite thing about Alaska?
Nature.
What would music fans be surprised to learn you listen to?
I like AC/DC. Maybe.
My daughter's favorite.
It's a good one.
Are they good? Can you hum along with their tunes?
You can hum along with the guitar riffs, for sure.
Favorite city to perform in?
Couldn't pick one. Impossible.
Where do you feel most at peace?
With me.
Tell me something people don't know about you.
I have a dark sense of humor.
Dark sense? Mm-hmm. Really dark?
Really dark.
You go places.
Your eyebrows raise. I see what you're like.
Close the doors. Jewel is answering your social media questions in our final segment. Stay with us. We're back with the great Jewel. The book in paperback, Never Broken. The album, Picking Up the Pieces. The website, jewelneverbroken.com. Have some social media questions, but you had a tough relationship. Your mother left, right?
She did.
When you were 8. Do you see, when you mothering your child, do you do the opposite of what your mother did with you?
I wouldn't say the opposite. That would just be very contrary, and I don't think authentic. For me, learning to mother was much more about going inside and really finding a genuine relationship to myself and who I am and what kind of person I am, and then relating that to being a mother.
You're a single mother.
I am.
Is the father close to the case?
Yeah, Ty and I are good friends. And
that's nice.
It's important. It's actually not important, it's essential.
Does he live near you?
No, he lives in Texas, but we both travel enough that...
So you're in Telluride and Nashville. How do you split your time?
There's really no rhythm or pattern to it yet. My son isn't in school, so I'm able to still travel around and do music and these types of things. But I am working on doing things that I can do from home so that I can still do stuff.
How'd you pick a name like Case?
His dad picked it. Yeah, we liked it.
Okay, a couple of social media questions. Mark Webster on our blog. You've had a long career. How has your approach to songwriting changed?
That's a good question. I think no matter what genre I'm writing, I feel like the same person. I come from a singer-songwriter's position. I was always drawn to writers who had a very unapologetic approach to how they perceived life. So Loretta Lynn or Joni Mitchell had a lot in common to me. They were just talking about where they were from and how they saw it. So whether I'm writing pop or country or folk, that's still my take on it. The rest is just sort of like going into your closet and saying, do I feel like wearing sweatpants today or do I feel like wearing a dress today? You wear different clothing, but it doesn't make you a different person as a songwriter.
Is there a place you go to write, or could you write anywhere?
Luckily, I can write anywhere, yeah.
Joan Diaz via our blog. What's the most important thing you've learned from your parents? And was it something you learned because they did it well or because they didn't do it well?
Probably some both. My dad's a very non-judgmental, very curious person, and I think that's helped me a lot in my life. And being raised around that pioneer spirit, I never knew my mind had a sex, and so I felt like I was capable. I didn't know that I wasn't.
At Flyer Natalie tweets, growing up on the homestead in Alaska, did you go to school?
I did go to school, yeah. We'd walk about a 2-mile dirt road and then either hitchhike to school or take a bus, depending on which school and what time of year it was.
What was it like in the summer when it didn't get dark?
Alaska's amazing, and I remember coming home from riding a horse at 2 a.m. I had no idea it was 2 a.m. I was just starving, and I was like, why am I so hungry? And you realize it's 2 in the morning, and it's still bright out.
Al Pacino made that great movie, Insomnia.
Yeah, it is good.
Going to that great movie. And Darth Durf tweets, why don't you act like the rest of us humans? You are unusual. Agreed? You know you're different. You know you're different.
I don't feel I'm different. I don't feel like what I've accomplished in my life as far as learning to be the architect of a life versus the passenger of a life. I think that's something everybody can do. And I think a lot of people feel like they need the right therapist or the right marriage or the right home or just the right circumstance to figure out how to get happy. And I feel like if I could figure it out while I was homeless, anybody can. And that's why I developed the website. It's not elitism. Happiness is for everybody, and it's really up to our thoughts and what we do with it.
Frank Sinatra told me, well, I don't mean to name drop, but he told me there's a lot to be said for longevity in show business.
Definitely.
What's the key to yours?
I don't think there's one path. I do know that when I was signed at 18, my hope was to be doing this a long, long time. So I tried to make decisions based on what supports art and integrity and authenticity instead of what supports fame. And so there's a lot of things I've turned down and said no to that probably would have made me more famous or more rich. I took years between records, which is not recommended, but as a songwriter, you have to go for what helps you be a songwriter and a real human and a happy human, more than you have to think about what's going to make you famous.
You write about your path to happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Are you happy?
I am. I don't think happiness is actually this destination. I think it's a side effect.
It's an absence of unhappiness, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a side effect of a way of living that I think is really important.
Is there one piece of advice you could give to viewers before they go on the website, before they read the book? Just a good piece of day-to-day advice about living.
I think one of the most fundamentally groundbreaking things for me has just been literally write eight adjectives that describe your values. And as you're going about your day, just see if the things you're doing fit those or not. That really changed my life.
Do you wake up, open your eyes in the morning positively?
Moods are ebbs and flows. You know, I don't think happiness means like I'm happy all the time and like I never feel sad. That isn't the case. To me, it's sort of like happiness is being willing to be a tree that lets the wind and the weather pass through its branches instead of grabbing the wind and letting that pull them down. The weather happens, bad moods happen, but you're resilient enough to withstand those things.
How do you like motherhood?
Love motherhood. It's like a Christmas present I get to unwrap every day. It's the best thing in the world.
That's a great line. Thanks, Jewel.
Thank you. Really nice to see you.
Thanks to my guest, Jewel. Her memoir is Never Broken. Her latest album is Picking Up the Pieces, and the website is jewelneverbroken.com, and you can find me on Twitter at King's Things, and I'll see you next time. On Larry King Now, she requires but one name. It's Jewel.
Fame is a path a lot of people lose their footing on, and I knew I was very vulnerable to that because of my background. And so I decided, I went to the beach and asked myself like a question, why am I doing this? And I realized it wasn't for fame or for money, it was for the opportunity to do something that I love and that I believe in. And that's an opportunity I never thought I'd be given in life.
Sometimes in retrospect, I'm glad I grew up poor.
Yeah, I think it's a benefit.
Yeah.
I think that we learn we're capable only by having an obstacle to overcome. I'm starting to get really interested and really passionate about being able to communicate the same things I always talked about in songs, but now through other forms.
Plus, secret talent.
I can move every muscle on my face.
You can what?
I can move every muscle on my face. I can yodel. That might be cooler. God, did you say yodeling was cooler?
All next on Larry King Now. Welcome to Larry King Now. She only needs one name. Jewel is a Grammy Award-nominated multi-platinum singer-songwriter whose music has sold more than 30 million albums globally. Her latest album is called Picking Up the Pieces. We have it right here. And Jewel's memoir, Never Broken, Songs Are Only Half the Story, a New York Times bestseller, is now available in paperback as well. And she's debuted a website in conjunction with the book, also called Never Broken. Nice seeing you again,
Nice seeing you. And I have to say the dexterity of talking to the camera and getting these without looking was very impressive.
Yeah,
You're professional. You're professional. It ain't a hobby.
Tell me about the website. It features exercises to retrain your brain.
Yeah. The reason I wrote the book is because a lot of people ask me how I went from having an abusive background to moving out at 15 to being homeless and not become a statistic. I did know that, you know, statistically, girls like me, especially if you move out at that young of an age, would repeat the cycle that they were raised by. So I should have been, you know, in an abusive relationship or on drugs or on a pole or some combination of those things. And I didn't want to be a statistic. And so I looked at this idea of nature versus nurture. And if we didn't receive good nurture, could you actually ever get to know your nature? And could you re-nurture yourself? And so I felt like these were questions I had to answer if I was going to avoid repeating the cycle I was raised by.
And you do it yourself?
Well, I didn't have any resources. I didn't have therapists, and I literally was just a girl, 15, hitchhiking to work to try and cover rent. But I started, you know, looking and studying things. Nature was a great resource, actually, for me, and observance. So I read a lot and determined things like what I call emotional English. You know, we're all raised with an emotional language that we speak in our households. It's kind of invisible to us, but it's our language of love and relating. And when we grow up, that is the language we speak. So even if we don't like the language we were raised with, and we can say, pretend it's English, you know, English hurt me. Or if it's abuse, abuse hurt me, I'll never be abusive to my kids. All that does is create a vacuum. You actually have to learn a new language if you're going to replace the old language. And so that's what a lot of my life was about.
And you could teach it in a website?
Yeah, it's actually through a lot of mindfulness exercises. Back in, you know, the 80s and 90s when I was figuring